So let's talk about somewhere where things have been going slightly better against the left, at least, which is Australia, because they recently had a referendum. And this is a very strange thing, I would say, to have a referendum on, but then that's because I'm from England and I don't understand Australian internal politics. So I'm going to do my very best with this, and I'm going to skip over a lot of detail because I'm not from Australia, and I will run the risk of getting everything wrong. But so what happened recently is the referendum on a campaign called the Indigenous Voice, or just the Voice, which is a proposed advisory body to the federal parliament in Australia that would represent the views of Indigenous communities. And there was a big vote on this, and Australia voted overwhelmingly no by a greater margin than the Brexit votes, by 60-40%, something like that.
So I've obviously done a lot on this. The reason that it was up for a referendum rather than just implementing the advisory body, because I believe they've got a Labour government at the moment, and one of their campaign pledges was that they were going to do this. The reason for the referendum, because if they get it in the referendum, if they get a yes from the referendum, it changes the constitution and basically makes it so that no future government can then just turn around and say, no, we don't think this advisory body works.
Yeah. So it'd be
shut it down.
There in perpetuity, and there'd be nothing they could do about it other than a constitutional change, which requires a double vote.
Yeah, it requires a double majority for a win. But so I don't know why the Australian politicians were arrogant enough to think that they could get such a thing.
Well, you're exactly right. It seems to have been arrogance that underpinned this, especially in the way that the campaign was carried out. I watched a lot of videos this weekend on it because I found it kind of fascinating. And there were some just small YouTube channels, 2,000 or 3,000 subscribers, doing these really great videos where they was explaining, look, this is what happened. And really, it was the arrogance of the yes vote that was the problem. And it felt very much like Brexit.
Well, that's the thing. From what I saw, most of the argument that they had against the no vote was, well, you're racist. Similarly to the Brexit.
Or you're spreading misinformation.
I saw a great pair of articles from The Guardian, Australia, where they were going through, here's what the no vote pamphlet says, and we'll fact check that. And every single line would have been fact checked, misleading. This is evil. I can't believe. And the yes vote would just, every single line was, here's a little bit of extra added context for this that doesn't in any way refute what they're saying.
Yeah. And so I watched a bunch of the footage of the day, which was quite great. Again, it was like watching the Young Turks in 2016 when Trump won. Like the faces of these lefty indigenous activists who are just like falling, and you could see they were becoming immensely crushed.
I saw it was all white women as well, weeping.
Hi folks, we've rolled out a new feature on the website, which is the ability to pay for an individual piece of content. So usually it's £5 a month every month to subscribe to all of the content on the website. But I appreciate there are going to be people who simply don't want to do that. They would be interested instead in purchasing a single piece of content for a lower amount, and they've got a particular niche that they're interested in watching. And so they don't want every single piece of content. They just want this one thing. So we've introduced this function where you can just simply purchase the one thing for £1.89, which I think is about $2.30 at the current exchange rates. And then that's just yours forever. So there's no sort of commitment there. There's no rolling subscription. It's just that one thing. So that's an option now that's on the website. It's completely live. It's completely available. And please go and enjoy it. And we'll see you all very soon.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When I say indigenous activists, I don't mean indigenous people. I mean left-wing white women who are just like, oh, well, it's not over. It's not over. It's like, and the thing is, it's not over. That's the point. So anyway, had it succeeded, Wikipedia tells us, the Australian Constitution would have recognised Indigenous Australians in the document by prescribing the voice, which would have made representations to the Parliament of Australia on matters relating to Indigenous Australians. So you would have carved out a position of racial privilege for a portion of the Australian public.
They like to couch this by saying, oh, well, it has no veto ability. It's purely there for advisory matters. But at the end of the day, if the Australian government is willing to go this far to get that in the first place, why are we assuming that they would say no to any of the proposed advice?
But why should another racial group not have a special voice to advise and have a special place in the prominence of the conversation? Why should not every race have that, in fact? It opens the door to, of course, terrible things. An illiberal world order. And so anyway, the they realize that they've lost this, but it's not over, and they're going to keep going because, of course, apparently it could just be legislated into being rather than have a constitutional amendment made, which is like, okay, great. So this isn't over for them, right? But yeah, just to be clear, the powers that it would have is apparently not to have a program delivery function, not to have a veto power, and it will just be, quote, independent advice to the government. It's like, yeah, on day one. That's what it would be on day one. On day 100, day 200, day 500, who knows, right? And so the Australians got up and did their duty and absolutely ruined them, which was nice to see.
Note the one small present of yes.
Yeah, do you know what that is, Callum?
A major city?
That's the capital of Australia, Canberra.
Hey, man, the cities are the problems.
Yes.
The population of the cities are the problem.
Nah, it's the city itself. It ruins humans.
There's something about Western cities that is poisonous to Western civilization. That is true. So yeah, anyway, as you can imagine, insane lefty areas voted yes. And what I find amusing about this, if I can get down to it, we've got like, boroughs where you can see like it's certain boroughs that just vote like 80% yes. And it's like, right, okay. That's very interesting.
Do we know what the turnout for the actual indigenous peoples was?
Well, yeah, it's something like 98% because Australia has mandatory voting.
Oh.
So you go to jail if you don't vote.
Oh, okay.
Which is interesting because it makes the Australians a lot more politicized and a lot more savvy when it comes to their own politics.
I suppose you're forced into a position where you have to be.
Yeah, exactly. You literally have to be. British people, of course, know virtually nothing about politics, which is why they keep voting Labour and Tory. And the Australians apparently do. So anyway, as you can see, like inner city Melbourne, which is a place held by the Green Party leader, bucked the national trend and had 78% of voters voting yes. So you can see that Callum is right. The cities are the problem. So I thought I'd get to the no vote campaign side. Just have a look at just the way that they're pitching this, right? This is their elevator pitch. The indigenous voice to parliament will wreck our constitution, rewire our democracy, and divide Australians by race. It's divisive, it's dangerous, it's expensive, and not fair. Okay, that's interesting because that means that the no vote was predicating itself on anti-racism. It was predicating itself on not recognizing distinctions between races. Okay, so of course that makes them the racists, according to the people who are advocating for racial differences to be enshrined in the Australian Constitution. An ex-Prime Minister made a quite good, little thing on the argument for it. The real purpose of the referendum is to change our system of government by injecting a permanent element of racial privilege into the heart of the Constitution. It should give Indigenous Australians and their descendants for all time a second method of influencing public policy that goes beyond the benefits of representative democracy that are already enjoyed by all citizens regardless of race. So you can see they have an explicitly anti-racist platform that they're standing on here. They do not want, distinctions between races. It would constitutionalize a race-based lobby group equipped with a separate bureaucracy that would give Indigenous citizens the ability to have an additional say on every law and administrative decision, not just those relating specifically to Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders. Why would the capital vote for this, do you think?
Because of their stupid liberal anti-racism ideology, which means that to be anti-racist, we must be as racist as possible to make up for past racism.
It's interesting you say it's liberal because it's actually not. It's post-liberal. And I'll get on to why it's post-liberal in a minute if you want. But anyway, so I thought...
The funny thing is that the whole yes vote was predicated on the idea that the Aboriginals and the Torres Strait Islanders, they all have terrible socioeconomic conditions. Yep. They all live in abject poverty. They suffer from incredible rates of alcoholism and all of these different things.
Petrol sniffing,
for instance.
And I know what the solution is because I live in a major city, miles and miles away from.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Is that most of these people, the only Aboriginal people that they know will be people who
activists
had a great grandfather who was, but otherwise are basically entirely European genetically.
Or activists.
Yeah, or activists.
Callum, just for can you look up the demographics, the Aboriginal demographics of Canberra, please? I actually forgot.
That's an excellent idea.
I forgot to do that because I bet this is an entirely Western idea.
But the problem is that the socioeconomic conditions have nothing to do with a lack of representation in Parliament or a lack of representation in the Constitution.
No.
They're much more concrete than that and down to generally the culture and behavior of the people themselves.
What a surprise.
Yeah. Alice Springs is a really good case study where they had specific laws to prevent Aboriginal people from buying alcohol because of the incredible rates of spouse and domestic abuse, beatings going on there, child sexual abuse, all sorts.
Yep.
So they put those laws in place. And then a few years ago, I think it was either last year or the year before, they lifted those laws under the claims that, oh, this is horribly racist. We can't keep doing that.
I mean, it literally is racist.
Yeah, but 6 months later, they put them right back in place because you know what? The second they did that, all of those same things that they were put in place to stop in the first place, domestic violence, abuse, spiked massively.
Yeah, now, one could say, well, that is racist, but one could also reframe it and say, well, yes, but it's also multicultural, right? It's recognizing the differences between two groups of people and what actually serves them. And that is what the Yes campaign is predicated upon. All of the Yes campaigns, I watched loads and loads of these videos and like live streams, or like not live stream, TV broadcasts that were streamed on YouTube, of them saying, we need to be able to help these communities. So, okay, then what you're saying is there's something different about these communities. You're saying there's something tangibly different. They can't be ruled in the same way that Western or European Australians.
Yeah, if you believe in the true understanding of diversity, that being that different people are in fact different, behave differently, and therefore sometimes require different rules to be applied for them, then if you want the best outcomes for those people, for instance, them not brutalizing each other, then you will have to apply different rules to them.
And this is exactly what the Yes campaign's argument
because
is.
I don't want, shockingly enough, I don't want people to be brutalized and beaten and miserable all the time. I know, shocking and very spicy take.
Very right-wing take, that.
It's a very right-wing take that I prefer law and order to complete abject chaos. But sometimes those are the rules. Like if you go back even to the 1960s when they were still talking about the White Australia policy that was in place at the time, if you watch the interviews that they did on the streets and they were asking people who were in favor of the policy, well, what should we do about the Aboriginals, though? All of these people who are saying, no, we need to keep the borders closed, we need to make sure we're only having Europeans come in, they're all like, oh, well, we need to look after the Aboriginals. We can't, because they had this very paternal, fatherly instinct of they're basically children to us. So we want to look after them, make sure they don't hurt themselves.
And that's basically what the Yes argument is. Anyway, let's go to Helen's article on this, Helen Dale's article. She explains why this failed. What?
I have the numbers.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, excellent.
It's 7,000 people in a city of almost 500,000.
Really?
Yeah.
7,000 Aboriginals.
Those
How
people,
are we classifying Aboriginals in there? Is
those
it just
people are claiming ancestry.
Right.
so? There you go. So it'll be pretty much white people who say, "Oh my God, my great 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 grandfather might have been an Aboriginal, so I'm Aboriginal."
The Elizabeth Warrens of the Australian world, yes. Isn't that fascinating? 60% overall in Canberra. Amazing. It's
0.5% of the population.
but this is the sort of post-liberal paternalistic view that they have. Their argument is predicated on the Aboriginals being different and not able to govern their lives as Europeans do. That's what it's predicated on. That must be what they're thinking when they come to these conclusions.
Well, the advice board, if it was put in place, would just be, well, we need more money to these particular people. And they actually had something like this, except on a more local level, in the 1990s through to 2005.
Well, and
it just turned into a place for people to abuse their own power and siphon money to their buddies.
There are areas in Australia where they have these kind of local advisory boards in the States. But anyway, so Helen says that the bulk of the failure of the Yes campaign has roots in the fact that the Voice, if passed into law, looked like awarding a group of people extra political rights based on race. This was the strongest argument, and the Yes tried to rebut it by pointing out there was only one race, the human race, which makes it impossible to draw distinctions based on race.
So it was a schizophrenic campaign.
But they literally are drawing distinctions based on race. They are literally saying the Aboriginals need help because they are not the same race, and therefore we will identify them as Aboriginals and give them a special racial privilege, and you're a racist if you disagree with this. So their entire argument is predicated on the fact this is race, and so the defense, they go, well, there's only one race, the human race. You don't believe that. You don't believe that, and it's very evident. The people who do believe it are the normal Australians, who are just basically just normal liberals when it comes to this. And they have at least 3 of the false presuppositions of liberalism, that everyone is equal, that there was a universal man, and that people are blank slates. Although I've got to say, I mean, a lot of Australians probably don't think that, actually. But ideologically, that's where the sort of right wing is on these things. No, you one man, one vote, basically.
And from the Australians that I've spoken to, when you go out of the cities and you go into the outback,
I bet they've got a much more realistic view of things.
Well, yeah, because they actually have contact with these people and understand that there are differences.
Yeah, and that's basically what they're saying. So what they're saying is anti-racism, as liberalism would have it, is a form of racism, right? And that's not new. Obviously, the American left has been saying this for a long time, but I think this is just really well developed in the Australian case. It's really shown just mask off at this point. We want racial privileges. There's only one race, the human race, but also you're a racist if you don't give this race racial privileges, right? Like, it couldn't be more cut and dried. It couldn't be more crystal clear. So they are not what they say they are, and it couldn't be more evident. And so, I mean, it's the indigenous people continue to face entrenched disadvantages and ongoing institutional racism, the Australian government acknowledged in 2020. I never thought I would experience it in my time here, says Karen Gibson, a Yalanji and Nikunjal woman. My ancestors were
Aboriginal name.
Yeah, right. My ancestors were invisible. They're still invisible. I want to be visible. It's like, okay, what are you even saying here, though? It's like, we're not like you. You don't really understand us. But if we're treated like you, we become oppressed. And so we need special racial visibility. Right? That is the core of what they're arguing for underneath all of it. Right? And so, okay. The answer then is that what the question that has to be asked of these people is, what is it you actually want? I forgot to get this up for this podcast, but I had a conversation with Steve Hughes, who's an American comedian, right? You probably know his, right?
Isn't he Australian?
Sorry, Australian. I meant so.
Yeah, I've seen that interview.
Yeah, it's right. And he's like, look, the Aboriginals are like a cosmic people. It's like, okay, that's a really interesting way of framing them, and I think he's kind of right. Right? They look at the world in a different way to the Europeans. What?
I want the ethno state in the sky.
No. When he's saying cosmic, he means like the entire universe around them.
Okay.
Not just in one area of space, right? But the question is, okay, what do these communities actually want? So if you want to follow like a traditional way of life, you will never have equality with Europeans and material living standards, right? That's never going to be the case, because it's the way that you behave that determines the outcomes you get. And so if you don't want to behave like Europeans in your work ethos and all other things, you can't expect anything other than inequality. And so the left are on the horns of a dilemma here, where they're like, look, we want them to be different because they are different, but we also want them to have all of the same things, even though that difference is going to persist. And they obviously can't have this both ways.
Well, the difference don't just persist. It seems that if you take these, as you say, cosmic people, if that's the term that you want to put
I think that's a really great way of terming it. And I'd like to become a more cosmic person.
Well, if you take the cosmic people, those whose culture is still very much wedded to much older
a sort of mythological
ways of
view
doing
of the
things,
universe.
and if you put them into the modern environment, they can't cope with it. Realistically speaking, that's why you end up with all of the alcoholism, all of the problems with sniffing petrol.
All of the inequalities, right? This is what they're complaining about, of course. The left's complaining about
They had a more natural way of living, and to expect them to be able to cope in the modern way of living is kind of cruel in a sense.
But also ridiculous. Obviously, you're not going to have the same outcomes following totally different trajectories of your societies, right? And so this is what they're coming to, is where they're saying, look, we demand that these people have everything that you guys have, even though they don't do any of the things they need to do to get the things that you guys have, right? That's what the left has come to, because they have to admit that there are differences, and they stand on that ground. Like, they actively stand on it, which is what they're asking for is ideological nonsense. Because, I mean, I imagine the average person, Aboriginal Australian, be like, well, obviously, if I haven't earned the thing, I probably don't deserve it. I mean, maybe they don't. I don't know. Right. But anyway.
So, once again, a lot of this is promoted by the activists and pushed by the activists.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, so the Australian Constitution actually does recognise race as well, which is interesting. As the Spectator Australia points out, Section 5126 of the Constitution currently allows the Commonwealth to make laws concerning people of any race for whom it is deemed necessary to make special laws. So, of course, they fall into the liberal view and say, well, look, let's replace those with the Constitution shall make no laws with respect to the race of persons that shall be and it should be illegal to specify race in any laws or regulations. That's a fairly comprehensive rejection of racism, isn't it? Yes, that is a comprehensive rejection of racism. However, that's not a comprehensive rejection of the problems that are going to arise that the left is demanding that you recognize.
Well, I mean, the problem is that a section like that of the Australian Constitution is what will allow a place like Alice Springs to put up laws that are explicitly aimed at the Aboriginal people. But the problem is, if you take
that's why it's there.
Yeah, if you take that out of the Constitution and therefore either have it so that the laws in Alice Springs are no one can buy alcohol or everyone can buy alcohol, all of a sudden those problems that the law is designed to combat in the first place will spring right back up again, just like what happened when they did repeal those laws in the first place. So this kind of, as much as I appreciate the sentiment of it, like you say, it is a false assumption of liberalism that sometimes people come in all shapes and sizes and in all different types of behavior. People have all sorts of things that come from their heritage. And sometimes you can't expect everyone to behave the same when put in the same circumstances.
Exactly. And this is what the conservatives are. They are morally right, in my opinion, to have one rule for all. But this works when you have relatively homogenous societies in Europe, say, where, okay, yes, we're not going to have a different rule for the French, the Germans, and the Poles. You either all do this or none of you do this. Okay, fine. But you have people who are just from a totally different kind of civilization. And that's what the left is depending on is not only true, but also needs to be recognized. And in a way, they're kind of right. Right, in a way, they're kind of right about this.
They're right in recognizing that there are differences, but the solution for it is just going to turn into a shakedown. It will inevitably just turn into resource extraction, as it always does.
Sure, but the thing is, it's not necessarily wrong that it's resource extraction. What it's going to turn into is a left-wing ideological project that continues to further strengthen, essentially, an anti-Australian sentiment, and totally continue to undermine the country in the same way that it's doing everywhere else. And so it's something that the Australians, thankfully, have rightly rejected, but that doesn't solve any of the problems that the left is using as a lever against Australian society. So that's the main issue. And the last thing, Callum, have you got the mouse? Can we play this?
Yes, sure.
Can we play this from the beginning? Because listen to the Indigenous, before we go on, the Indigenous Affairs reporter Isabella Higgins, average Aboriginal, says the no victory in the Indigenous voice to Parliament referendum could change the way Indigenous Australians will want to interact with the rest of the country going forward.
But I think it's also been the conventional wisdom in our communities that when we're talking about reconciliation, we use kind language, we're generous, we extend the hand of friendship, we invite people in to share our culture. And I think if we look at the campaign messaging around the voice, it was similar to that. So I think this failing, this being rejected so categorically by all Australians, it will change the way Indigenous Australians want to interact with the rest of the country. It will change whether kindness is the best approach. I think often in the community, it is well understood that Black anger is not tolerated. And so we see leaders pull in their rage, pull in their sadness, and constantly use language of generosity, use graciousness to try and appeal to the Australian people. And after this, I think there will be a generation of leaders who have been burnt by this and who won't be interested in doing that anymore. I would not be surprised if more people push towards that message that comes from Lydia Thorpe about not engaging so much with mainstream Australia, not bowing to them, challenging the Australian regime. And of course there will be anger. I think even if you weren't a card-carrying yes voter in the Indigenous community, to see the vote, to see Australians reject this so categorically, that's really hard to feel, to experience. The whole debate was very uncomfortable. It felt like at times the worth of an Indigenous life was being debated. So I think the message from people like Lydia Thorpe, the message around Black sovereignty will appeal more after this.
Why is she smirking?
Well, she's calling for BLM solutions by the sounds of it.
Yes, she's smirking. She looks happy that this was rejected.
Finally, we can smash and grab.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Like, she's smiling because this isn't a defeat for the left-wing cause. This is a casus belli. This is now, okay, we are going to propagandize this community to be against white Australia, however we should, and go for black sovereignty, and try and do to the Aboriginals what the left has done to the black community in America. What?
Aboriginals from Africa.
Yep.
I mean, I'm sorry, but just when people talk about black,
Oh, yeah.
sovereignty or black whatever, it's just like,
Calling them black is
I mean,
very
that was one of
strange.
what I think was one of the strongest arguments that I saw from some people on the Australian right talking about the No campaign, which was that, okay, how are we even designating Aboriginal people?
Well, yeah,
in the
they're
first
just being
place?
called
This
black
is a
now.
point that you brought up, Callum, which is just that it takes in so many different tribes and so many different peoples who all see themselves opposition to one another that it's a completely nonsensical term in the first place.
Sure. I mean, yeah, they're not black because we use black as designating from Africa.
but this is a
Sub-Saharan
So-
Africa.
This
Yeah,
is
yeah.
a constituency you can now radicalize into quote unquote liberation, which involves killing babies, apparently.
Exactly. And so she's smirking because she knows the next stage of the
Next stage of
the next stage of the plan is
Finally, jihad, my brothers.
well, no, that's what she's smiling about. This is a left-wing jihad, right? And so they are going to produce lots of media that radicalizes a proportion of the Aboriginal community into thinking that they are having violence done to them, and therefore random racial attacks will become something I think will happen in Australia in the same way that they are in America, which isn't exactly good. But you can see she's happy about this. This is the left-wing goal. And so basically the end point that I want to arrive on is Australians don't think this is over. This will never be over. These people will continue.
And I thought that would be the cheery segment as well.
No, unfortunately not.
Well, I was going to call this an inverted S sandwich of a podcast, but no, it just seems that you've got the filling and the toppings as both.
But it's good that they held the line,
Yeah, no, it is.
but you can see ideologically and philosophically why they're going to continue to eat away at it, right?
Oh, of
'Cause-
course they are. They've taken one step. The first step was getting this idea in people's minds in the first place and getting the referendum to a vote.
yeah.
The next step will be that they probably will just legislate the body in the first place. It'll just mean that it's not constitutionally protected. But then you've got to wonder, will the opposition, when they next get in,
Well, they have the balls to do it.
Yeah,
Do
well,
conservatives ever do it?
how much money will be then flowing through that advisory board, which
Yeah.
will be a really good way for the Conservatives to go, maybe we should keep a hold of this, actually.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Brokenomics series, this episode on the Canadian truckers. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.